All right, welcome back, guys. We are going to go into letter number 30 today. This is on conquering the conqueror. This is a bit of a longer letter here, but let's go ahead and jump into it. He says, I have beheld Aphidius Bassus, that nobleman, shattered in his health and wrestling with his years. But they already bear upon him so heavily that he cannot be raised up. Old age has settled down upon him with great, yes, with its entire weight. You know that his body was always delicate and sapless. For a long time, he has kept it in hand, or, so to speak more correctly, he has kept it together. Of a sudden, it has collapsed. Okay, so I'm talking about this guy, right, obviously, who has aged and his body's kind of falling apart. He says here, just as in a ship that springs a leak, you can always stop the first or second fissure, but when many holes begin to open and let in water, the gaping hole cannot be saved. Similarly, in an old man's body, there is a certain limit up to which you can sustain and prop its weakness. But when it comes to resemble a decrepit building, when every joint begins to spread while one is being repaired, another falls apart, then it is time for man to look about him and to consider how he may get out. So he's saying that, look, you reach a point in old age where there's too many things to fix. Like you're just going downhill, and you have to face that the end is near, right? But the mind of our friend Bassus is active. Philosophy bestows this boon upon us. It makes us joyful in the very sight of death, strong and brave no matter what state the body may be, cheerful and never failing though the body fail us. A great pilot can sail even when his canvas is rent. If his ship be dismantled, he can yet put in trim what remains of her hull and hold her to her course. This is what our friend Bassus is doing, and he contemplates his own end with the courage and countenance which you would regard as undue indifference in a man who so contemplated another's. So he's saying that Bassus, this guy, he's doing the right thing. Okay, he is still braving the course, and he's not letting his failing body make him be upset, right? He's staying in this cheerful state. He's staying strong, right? He's saying just like a sailor can sail the ship, even when things are falling apart on the ship, he can still keep on keeping that ship on course, and that's what he's doing, all right? And he's contemplating his end with courage. He says here in verse 4, this is a great accomplishment, Lucilius, and one which needs long practice to learn, to depart calmly when the inevitable hour arrives. Other kinds of death contain an ingredient of hope. A disease comes to an end. A fire is quenched. Falling houses have set down in safety those whom they seemed to certain to crush. The sea has cast ashore unharmed those whom it had engulfed by the same force through which it drew them down. The soldier has drawn back his sword from the very neck of his doomed foe, but those whom old age is leading away to death have nothing to hope for. Old age alone grants no reprieve. No ending, to be sure, is more painless, but there is none more lingering. So he's saying that, here's the thing, all right? It takes some time to learn this, but it is a great accomplishment. And so to be calm when that hour arrives, he's saying other kinds of death besides old age, at least there's some hope. There's some hope that you could be saved from them. But old age, you know that there's no way to be saved from that. Our friend Bassus seemed to me to be attending his own funeral and laying out his own body for burial and living almost as if he had survived his own death and bearing with wise resignation his grief at his own departure. For he talks freely about death, trying hard to persuade us that if this process contains any element of discomfort or fear, it is the fault of the dying person and not of death itself. Also, that there is no more inconvenience at the actual moment than there is after it is over. So this guy's wise, right? He's talking about, he's acting as if he's already dead and living as if he had survived his own death. And, he's talking about it freely at this point, all right? And he's telling people, look, if you're afraid of it, it is you. It is not death itself. Death is nothing to be afraid of. It is a fault in you. In verse 6, he says, and is just as insane, he adds, for a man to fear what will not happen to him as to fear what he will not feel if it does happen. Or does anyone imagine it to be possible that the agency by which feeling is removed can be itself felt? Therefore, says Bassus, death stands so far beyond all evil that it is beyond all fear of evils. So he's saying that, look, it's kind of silly to fear something that you can't feel. Like when you die, you won't feel it. Unless, unless it's such that the by having feeling removed, can you feel that? Like that doesn't seem very probable. So he says that, death stands so far beyond all evil that is beyond all fears of evil. So because of that, there's really nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing that you're not going to even feel it. Before you die, yes. I know that all this has often been said and should be often repeated, but neither when I read them were such precepts so effective with me, nor when I heard them from the lips of those who were at a safe distance from the fear of the things which they declared were not to be feared. But this old man had the greatest weight with me when he discussed death, and death was near. So he's saying because this guy is so close to death, that's when the words really sunk in. For I must tell you what I myself think. I hold that one is braver at the very moment of death than when one is approaching death. For death, when it stands near us, gives even to inexperienced men the courage not to seek to avoid the inevitable. So the gladiator, who throughout the fight has been no matter how faint-hearted, offers his throat to his opponent and directs the wavering blade to the vital spot. But an end that is near at hand and is bound to come calls for tenacious courage of the soul. That is a rare thing, and none but the wise man can manifest it. So what he's saying here is he's saying, look, here's the thing, okay? This is what I think. It's braver, okay, at the moment of death than actually approaching death, all right? So one's braver at that moment than when you're approaching death, okay? So the reason for this is because when death is near us, okay, it gives inexperienced men this courage to not seek the inevitable. So when a gladiator has fought and he knows he's going to die, he actually lifts his throat to offer it to the blade because he knows that it's inevitable. Okay, so when it's that moment of death, people are more brave at that moment of death. But when it's at near and it's bound to come, that requires more courage because you know that it's coming. It's not here, but you know it's coming, right? So think about being on death row, right? Knowing that you're sentenced to death and that you're going to die in so many days. That he's saying that only a wise man can manifest that courage. Accordingly, I listened to Bassus with the deepest pleasure. He was casting his vote concerning death and pointing out what sort of thing it is when it is observed, so to speak, near at hand. I suppose that a man would have your confidence in a larger degree and would have more weight with you if he had come back to life and should declare from experience that there is no evil in death. And so, regarding the approach of death, those will tell you best what disquiet it brings, who have stood in his path, who have seen it coming and have welcomed it. So again, he's saying that, this Bassus guy, because of where he's at and how he's facing death, that what he's saying is a lot more believable, okay? Because he's actually there and he's actually doing it. And, the only man who you would believe more was someone who actually died and came back and told you that death is not to be feared, right? So, in verse 10, he says, Bassus may be included among these men, and he had no wish to deceive us. He says that it is as foolish to fear death as to fear old age, for death follows old age precisely as old age follows youth. He who does not wish to die cannot have wished to live, for life is granted to us with the reservation that we shall die. To this end our path leads. Therefore, how foolish it is to fear, since men simply await that which is sure, but fear only that which is uncertain. So he's saying that, look, it's silly to fear this because, you're going to grow up, you're going to become old. Like you already signed up for this, and part of signing up for this is that you're going to die. So if you wanted to live, then why should you not want the full bargain of this thing, right? And he's saying that it's foolish to fear it, since if you know that something's sure, then you just await it. But you fear the things that are uncertain. So if it's not uncertain, then why are you fearing it? Because it is certain. Death has its fixed rule, equitable and unavoidable. Who can complain when he is governed by the terms which include everyone? The chief part of equity, however, is equality, but it is superfluous at the present time to plead nature's cause, for she wishes our laws to be identical with her own. She but resolve that which she has compounded, and compounds again that which she has resolved. So he's saying that, look, death is equitable. It is the same for everyone. It's unavoidable. So are you going to complain at the same deal that every single person has gotten? It seems silly. Moreover, if it falls to the lot of any man to set gently adrift by old age, not suddenly torn from life, but withdrawn bit by bit, oh, verily, he should thank the gods, one and all, because after he has had his fill, he is removed to a rest which is ordained for mankind, a rest that is welcome to the weary. You may observe certain men who crave death even more earnestly than others are wont to beg for life. And I do not know which men give us greater courage, those who call for death or those who meet it cheerfully and tranquilly. For the first attitude is sometimes inspired by madness and sudden anger. The second is calm, which results from fixed judgment. Before now, men have gone to meet death in a fit of rage, but when death comes to meet him, no one welcomes it cheerfully except the man who has long since composed himself for death. So what he's saying here is he's saying that, look, it's actually good, right? You should actually be thankful if you make it to old age and you die from old age, because that means that you got to have your fill of life, okay? And now you're going to be removed from it and go on to your rest, okay? After you become weary from life. And he's saying that certain men actually even crave death than others who actually beg for life. And he's saying, I don't know which gives us greater courage, right? Is it the people who actually call for death, or the people who meet it cheerfully or tranquilly? He's saying that, well, sometimes the first attitude of people that call for death, it's just inspired by madness or sudden anger, okay? But the people who meet death with tranquility, that always comes from fixed judgment. And so some people have gone to meet death in a fit of rage, but when death comes to them or comes to a person, no one welcomes it cheerfully, okay, except the man who has actually composed himself for this, who's already thought about this, the philosopher, the wise man. I admit, therefore, that I have visited this dear friend of mine more frequently on many pretexts, but with the purpose of learning whether I should find him always the same, and whether his mental strength was perhaps waning in company with his bodily powers. But it was on the increase, just as the joy of the charioteer is wont to show itself more clearly when he is on his seventh round, of course, and nears the prize. So he's saying that, look, he went back to check on him, and he's like, okay, is this guy for real? Or is he just, as it gets worse, he gets closer, is he going to break down, or is he going to keep on saying the same stuff? And he said, no, he's actually better, right? Indeed, he often said, in accord with the counsels of Epicurus, I hope, first of all, that there is no pain at the moment when a man breathes his last, but if there is, one will find an element of comfort in its very shortness, for no great pain lasts long. And at all events, a man will find relief at the very time when soul and body are being torn asunder, even though the process be accompanied by excruciating pain, in the thought that after this pain is over, he can feel no more pain. I am sure, however, that an old man's soul is on his very lips, and that only a little force is necessary to disengage it from the body. A fire which is seized upon a substance that sustains it needs water to quench it, or sometimes the destruction of the building itself, but the fire which lacks sustaining fuel dies away of its own accord. So what he's saying here is he's saying, look, I don't know. I don't know, man. I hope that it's not painful when you die, but if it is, and even if it's excruciating, it will be short. And then you won't feel anything afterwards. So you just have to get through that one thing. And he's saying that, look, it's probably not the case, because if you're dying from old age, you probably don't have much that's holding you here anyway. So it's not going to take much to actually kill you. Okay. He says in verse 15, I am glad to hear such words, my dear Lucilius, not as new to me, but as leading me into the presence of an actual fact. And what then? Have I not seen many men break the thread of life? I have indeed seen such men, but those have more weight with me who approach death without any loathing of life, letting death in, so to speak, and not pulling it towards them. So he's saying, yeah, I've heard this before, but it still inspires me. Okay. And, like I said, it's guys like this that are just letting it be, right? That not someone who just hates life, but someone like this, like Bassus. Bassus kept saying, it is due to our own fault that we feel this torture, because we shrink from dying only when we believe that our end is near at hand. But who is not near death? It is ready for us in all places at all times. Let us consider, he went on to say, when some agency of death seems imminent, how much nearer are other varieties of dying which are not feared by us? So he's saying that, look, here's the actual state, is that you could die at any time. You might see it when you're going through old age, but at any time you could die. It is near to everyone. A man is threatened by death by an enemy, But this form of death is anticipated by an attack on indigestion. And if we're willing to examine critically the various causes of our fear, we shall find that some exist and that others only seem to be. We do not fear death, we fear the thought of death, for death itself is always the same distance from us. Wherefore, if it is to be feared at all, it is to be feared always. For what season of our life is exempt from death? So he's saying that, look, all right, it doesn't matter where you're at. Like, death is always there. And so if you're going to fear it, you should fear it all the time, but you shouldn't fear it at all. Okay. And he's saying that when you look carefully at what causes your fear, you'll find that some things are actually there and some only seem to be there, but we're not actually fearing death. We're fearing the thought of death. In verse 18, he says here, but what I really ought to fear is that you will hate this long letter worse than death itself. So I shall stop. Do you, however, always think on death in order that you may never fear it? Farewell. And there you have it. So the idea is that you should be thinking on death. And if you do that, then you will get to a point where you no longer fear it. And that is really one of the great accomplishments of a Stoic is to be able to look upon death and not fear death. I'll see you tomorrow.